The recognition. Julian Hayes adjusted his platinum cufflinks as he gazed across the table at Olivia Montrose, whose elegant fingers traced the rim of her wine glass. The soft candlelight of Lumiere, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, caught the diamond engagement ring he had placed on her finger just 3 weeks ago. A 3-carat emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires, unique just like her. To us, Julian said, raising his glass. At 42, he had built Horizon Technologies into a billion-dollar empire through sheer determination and calculated decision-making. Now he was finally allowing himself personal happiness. Olivia smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling slightly. To new beginnings, she replied, her voice carrying the slight lilt of her French heritage. As one of fashion's most celebrated designers, Olivia understood ambition. Perhaps that was why they worked so well together, two driven individuals who recognized that same quality in each other. The Tokyo expansion is nearly finalized, Julian said, cutting into his perfectly seared Wagyu steak. By this time next year, Horizon will have doubled its market share in Asia. Olivia nodded, but her attention shifted slightly to something behind him. Julian, she said, her tone changing, isn't that your ex-wife? Julian froze, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. He hadn't seen Vanessa Porter in nearly 5 years. Not since their divorce had been finalized in a sterile courtroom, ending their brief 3-year marriage with the same efficiency with which he approached everything in life. He turned slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs despite his outward composure. There she stood, being led to a table by the maitre d'. Vanessa looked different, her once platinum blonde hair now a rich chestnut falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated, so unlike the flashy outfits she had favored during their marriage. But it wasn't Vanessa who made Julian's blood run cold. It was the small boy holding her hand, no older than 4, with familiar gray eyes and the same cleft in his chin that Julian saw every morning in the mirror. Julian? Olivia's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. He couldn't answer. His mind was racing, calculating dates and possibilities. 5 years since the divorce. A child who appeared to be 4. The timing aligned with their final months together, when their marriage had already been crumbling, but they'd had one last night together. A moment of weakness, of remembering what had drawn them together in the first place. I need a minute, Julian finally managed, placing his napkin beside his plate and standing on legs that felt strangely unsteady. He walked toward Vanessa's table, aware that Olivia's confused gaze followed him. Vanessa noticed him before he reached the table. Her eyes widened slightly, a flash of something, panic, crossing her features before her expression settled into careful neutrality. Julian, she said softly as he approached, I didn't expect to see you here. The boy looked up at him curiously, his small face a miniature version of Julian's own. There was no denying it, not with those eyes, that chin, the shape of his ears. Vanessa, Julian said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside him. We need to talk. She hesitated, then nodded. Thomas, honey, can you color for a few minutes while I talk to this unfriend? She pulled a small coloring book and crayons from her purse, setting them before the boy, who nodded solemnly and began selecting colors with careful deliberation. Julian led Vanessa a few steps away, still within sight of both Thomas and Olivia, who was watching the exchange with growing concern. Is he mine? Julian asked without preamble, his voice low but intense. Vanessa met his gaze steadily. Yes, the single word hit him like a physical blow. How could you not tell me? He demanded, struggling to keep his voice down. You made it very clear that your company was your only priority, Vanessa replied, her calm exterior betraying a hint of the pain underneath. You were building an empire, Julian. There wasn't room for anything else, not even me. That wasn't your decision to make, he hissed, anger beginning to replace shock. He's my son. And where were you when I found out I was pregnant? Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. In Singapore, closing another deal. You missed our anniversary, Julian. You missed the doctor's appointment where I learned I was losing you in more ways than one. Julian ran a hand through his meticulously styled dark hair. I had a right to know. You had a right, Vanessa agreed quietly. But Thomas had a right to a father who would be present, who would choose him over a business meeting. I wasn't convinced you could be that man. Before Julian could respond, he felt a hand on his arm. Olivia had joined them, her expression a careful mask of politeness. "I don't believe we've met," she said, extending her hand to Vanessa. "I'm Olivia Montrose." "Vanessa Porter," Vanessa replied, accepting the handshake with grace. Her eyes flicked to the engagement ring. "Congratulations to you both." Julian watched as Thomas looked up from his coloring, his innocent gray eyes moving between the three adults. In that moment, Julian's carefully constructed world, the empire he had built, the future he had planned with Olivia, seemed to shift beneath his feet. "We should talk properly," he said to Vanessa. "Tomorrow, my office." He pulled out a business card and wrote his personal number on the back. As he returned to his table with Olivia, Julian could feel his fiancée's questioning gaze, but his mind was elsewhere. For a man who had built his life on control and calculation, he was now facing the most significant variable he had never accounted for. A son he didn't know existed. The remainder of dinner passed in a blur of tension and half-formed explanations. And as Julian drove Olivia home in his Bentley, the silence between them was filled with unasked questions and the overwhelming realization that nothing in his life would ever be the same. Again, the revelation. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian's penthouse office, illuminating the awards and accolades that lined the walls, testaments to his business acumen and relentless drive. Today, however, they seemed hollow, mere trinkets compared to the revelation that had upended his world. Julian loosened his tie, a rare gesture of discomfort for a man who prided himself on unwavering composure. The conversation with Olivia last night had been strained. He'd explained what little he knew, and she had listened, her designer's eye for detail catching every micro-expression on his face. "I need time to process this," she'd said finally, slipping off her engagement ring and placing it on his nightstand. "Not forever, just time." The intercom buzzed, pulling Julian from his thoughts. "Miss Porter is here," his assistant's voice announced. "Send her in," Julian replied, straightening his posture and reclaiming his professional demeanor. Vanessa entered alone, dressed in a simple gray pantsuit that spoke of quiet confidence. 5 years ago, she had been a gallery curator with an eye for emerging artists. Now Julian recalled reading something about her opening her own successful gallery in the River North District. "Thank you for coming," Julian said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I owed you that much," Vanessa replied, taking the seat but maintaining her poise. "Thomas is with my sister. I thought this conversation should be between us first." Julian nodded, appreciating her directness. It had been one of the qualities that attracted him to her years ago. "Tell me everything," he said. From the beginning, Vanessa took a deep breath. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks before I filed for divorce." "Our marriage was already over, Julian. You were in Tokyo, remember? Missing our 3rd anniversary." Julian winced at the memory. He had sent flowers, expensive ones, but he knew now how inadequate that gesture had been. "I was going to tell you," Vanessa continued. "I had this whole speech prepared about how we could co-parent even if our marriage couldn't be saved." She paused, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the arm of her chair. "Then I got a call from your assistant saying you couldn't make our dinner because you were extending your stay to close the Nakamura deal." "The cornerstone of our Asian expansion," Julian murmured, the victory now tasting like ash. "Exactly," Vanessa said, a sad smile playing on her lips. "That's when I knew. You would always choose Horizon over everything else. Even your child," Julian's jaw tightened. "You didn't give me the chance to prove otherwise. Would you have?" Vanessa challenged, her blue eyes piercing his. "Would you have turned down that deal if you'd known I was pregnant? Would you have come home, gone to doctor's appointments, been there for the midnight feedings?" The truth hung between them, uncomfortable but undeniable. Julian had been obsessed with building his empire, convinced that success would fill the emptiness left by his own father's abandonment. The irony was not lost on him. "Why now?" Julian finally asked. "Why come back to Chicago if you were so determined to keep him from me?" "I never planned for you to find out like this," Vanessa admitted. "But my gallery is expanding and Chicago has opportunities that Philadelphia didn't, and..." She hesitated. "Thomas has been asking about his father. Children at his preschool talk about their dads. He's starting to notice the absence." Julian leaned forward, his heart constricting. "What have you told him about me?" "That his daddy lives in Chicago, that he's very smart and builds important things, that sometimes grown-ups can't live to..." The reconciliation. The children's museum bustled with weekend energy, excited squeals and pitter-pattering feet echoing off interactive exhibits. Julian arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in casual clothes that felt foreign on his frame. Gone was the power suit, his armor in the corporate world, replaced by dark jeans and a simple blue button-down. He spotted Vanessa and Thomas near the water table exhibit, the boy's face alight with wonder as he manipulated the flow of water through various channels. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached, a nervousness he hadn't felt since his first business pitch years ago. Vanessa noticed him first, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. "Thomas," she said gently, "remember I told you someone special wanted to meet you today?" Thomas looked up, water dripping from his small fingers, his gray eyes, Julian's eyes, widening with curiosity. "Is it him?" he asked, pointing directly at Julian with the unembarrassed directness of childhood. "Yes, sweetheart. This is Julian. Your daddy." Vanessa spoke the words carefully, watching both of their reactions. Julian knelt to Thomas's level, his throat suddenly dry. "Hello, Thomas," he managed, his voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "It's very nice to meet you." Thomas tilted his head, studying Julian with the intense focus of a child making an important assessment. "Mommy says you build things." "That's right." Julian nodded, relieved to have something concrete to discuss. "I build technology, computers and software. Can you build robots?" Thomas asked, his interest piqued. "I could learn," Julian answered honestly, realizing he would learn anything, everything if this child asked it of him. Vanessa stepped back slightly, giving them space while remaining within Thomas's sight. "Thomas has been working on the water exhibit for 20 minutes, she explained. "He's very methodical." Julian watched as his son redirected water through a series of locks and channels, creating an efficient flow system that wouldn't have been out of place in a basic engineering class. "You're very good at that," he observed. "You understand how things connect." Thomas beamed at the praise. "Want to try? You can help me build a water city." Julian rolled up his sleeves without hesitation, aware that his watch, a timepiece worth more than some cars, might get splashed. For once, he didn't care. "I'd love to." The next hour passed in a blur of water experiments, building block challenges, and scientific demonstrations. Julian found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, as Thomas explained his theories about dinosaurs with the conviction of a seasoned paleontologist. "Hungry?" Vanessa asked eventually, approaching them as they finished constructing an elaborate marble run. Julian checked his watch, shocked to discover 3 hours had vanished. 3 hours without checking his email or taking a call, a personal record. "I could eat," he admitted, then looked at Thomas. "What's your favorite food?"
"Pizza with pineapple,"
Thomas declared emphatically. Julian grimaced playfully. "Really, pineapple?" "It's the best," Thomas insisted, giggling at Julian's exaggerated horror. "We'll have to agree to disagree on that one." "Buddy," Julian replied, the endearment slipping out naturally. They settled in the museum cafe, Thomas chattering between bites about his preschool friends and his toy collection. Julian absorbed every detail, filing away information like precious data points. Favorite color, green. Best friend, a boy named Oliver. Most loved bedtime story, the robot who found its heart. As Thomas finished his meal and ran to the nearby play area, still within sight, Vanessa turned to Julian. "You're good with him," she said, surprise evident in her tone. "He makes it easy," Julian replied honestly. "He's incredible, Vanessa." "Yes, he is." A moment of shared pride passed between them, bridging some of the distance the years had created. "I want to be part of his life," Julian stated firmly. Regular visits, holidays, school events, everything. Vanessa studied him, looking for the ruthless businessman she had married, but finding instead a man transformed by just a few hours with his son. And Horizon? "Your 60-hour work weeks. We'll have to adapt," Julian said without hesitation. "I've missed 4 years. I won't miss any more. And Olivia?" Vanessa asked quietly. Julian's expression tightened. His breakfast with Olivia that morning had been tense, her ultimatum clear. Choose the life they had planned together, or embrace the complications of co-parenting with an ex-wife. "She's struggling with the idea," he admitted. "She didn't sign up for this." Vanessa nodded, understanding without judgment. "Few people do." As Thomas ran back to their table, Julian made a silent promise, to himself and to this small boy with his chin in his eyes, that some things were worth rebuilding an entire life for. The choice. 3 weeks into Julian's new reality, Horizon Technologies' executive boardroom buzzed with tension. The quarterly projections displayed on the massive screen had been overshadowed by Julian's announcement. He was restructuring the leadership team and his own role. A chief operating officer? Eleanor Winters, his longest-serving board member, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You've always maintained complete operational control." Julian nodded, accepting the challenge in her tone. "That was before," he said simply, "before Thomas. Before weekly museum visits and Sunday morning pancake experiments. Before the realization that the empire he'd built meant nothing compared to his son's laugh." "The Tokyo expansion," began Richard Blackwood, a meticulous financial officer known for his dedication to the bottom line. "Will proceed as planned," Julian interrupted smoothly, with Patricia leading the negotiations. He nodded toward his most trusted executive, who straightened at the acknowledgement. "I'll remain involved in all major decisions, but day-to-day operations need someone who can be fully present." "And you can't," Richard stated. "Not a question, but an observation." "I won't," Julian corrected. "Not anymore." The meeting continued, skepticism gradually giving way to reluctant acceptance as Julian outlined his vision. Not abandonment of the company, but evolution, a structure that allowed for both growth and balance. Concepts that would have seemed foreign to him just weeks ago. Later that afternoon, Julian's sleek Bentley pulled up outside Thomas's preschool. It was the first time he was picking up his son alone, a milestone Vanessa had suggested, her trust in him growing incrementally with each successful visit. "You're Thomas's dad?" asked the teacher at the door, checking his ID against the authorized pickup list. "Yes," Julian replied, the word still new and wondrous on his tongue. "I am." Thomas emerged from the classroom clutching a finger-painted masterpiece, his face lighting up when he spotted Julian. "Daddy, I made space." Julian crouched down, examining the swirls of blue and purple dotted with white specks. "It's amazing. Is this for your room?" Thomas shook his head solemnly. "It's for your office, so you can see space even when you're working." Something tightened in Julian's chest. Gratitude, love, and lingering regret for the years missed. "It's perfect. I know exactly where I'll hang it." They walked hand in hand to the car, Thomas chattering about his day while Julian listened with an attention he once reserved for market projections. As they drove toward Julian's penthouse, their first evening alone together, his phone rang through the car's speaker system. "Olivia," announced the automated voice. Julian hesitated, glancing at Thomas in the rearview mirror. He hadn't spoken to his fiancée, former fiancée, in nearly 2 weeks, not since their tense breakfast. "Thomas, I need to take this call. Is that okay?" Thomas nodded, already distracted by the tablet Julian had loaded with educational games. "Olivia," Julian answered, keeping his voice neutral. "Julian." Her voice was clear, composed, the voice she used for difficult client presentations. "I'm at your apartment. We need to talk." Julian checked the time. "I have Thomas with me. We'll be there in 15 minutes. A pause. "Oh, I didn't realize." The unspoken question hung in the air. Was this his life now? "Pickups and finger paintings? We can meet another time," Julian offered, though the thought of prolonging the inevitable exhausted him. "No," Olivia decided. "I'd like to meet him, actually." "If that's appropriate." Julian considered this, then agreed. 15 minutes, he repeated, ending the call. "Who's Olivia?" Thomas asked from the back seat, pronouncing the name carefully. Julian met his son's eyes in the mirror. "She's a friend of mine. A very good friend. Would you like to meet her?" Thomas considered this with the seriousness of a child making an important decision. "Does she like robots?" Julian smiled despite his anxiety. "I'm not sure. We'll have to ask her." Olivia was waiting in the penthouse lobby when they arrived, elegant as always in a tailored ivory pantsuit, her dark hair swept into a perfect chignon. Julian saw her eyes widen slightly at the sight of Thomas, recognition and something like pain flashing across her features before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Hello?" she said, extending her hand first to Thomas. "I'm Olivia. You must be Thomas." Thomas, suddenly shy, pressed closer to Julian's leg but politely shook her hand. "Do you like robots?" he asked immediately. A genuine smile broke through Olivia's composure. "I've never given them much thought, but I design clothes. That's a bit like building, isn't it?" Thomas considered this. "I guess. But robots are cooler." The elevator ride to the penthouse was filled with Thomas's questions about Olivia's designs, her answers growing warmer as she responded to his innocent curiosity. Julian watched the interaction with a strange mix of emotions, hope and resign. The future rewritten. 6 months later, Julian stood in the doorway of Thomas's new bedroom, watching as his son arranged dinosaur figurines in a complex battle formation across his space-themed bedspread. The room, occupying what had once been Julian's home office in his penthouse, was now a testament to childhood imagination. Walls painted with a mural of the solar system, bookshelves filled with stories of adventure, and a desk already cluttered with the beginnings of engineering projects. "All set for your first night here?" Julian asked, leaning against the doorframe. Thomas looked up, his face serious. "Do you think Mom will be okay alone?" Julian's heart swelled at the question, evidence of his son's empathy, his awareness of others' feelings. "She'll miss you, but she's excited for our special weekends together. And remember, it's just 3 nights every week. You'll be back with her before you know it." The custody arrangement had been reached amicably, with Vanessa's surprising support. "He needs his father," she had said during a counseling session, the bitterness of the past gradually dissolving into a tentative co-parenting partnership. "And I think you need him too." "Can we call her before bedtime?" Thomas asked, carefully, positioning a T-Rex as the apparent leader of his dinosaur army. "Absolutely," Julian promised. "Now how about we finish unpacking your books?" As they worked together, Julian marveled at how completely his life had transformed. Horizon continued to thrive under the new leadership structure, but his own involvement had been strategically reduced. He was home by 6 most evenings, had not missed a single one of Thomas's preschool events, and had even joined a support group for newly divorced fathers, something the Julian of a year ago would have dismissed as unnecessary emotionality. The doorbell rang, interrupting their organization project. "That'll be the pizza," Julian announced, eliciting an excited cheer from Thomas. "Half pineapple for you, half normal for people with proper taste," he teased, their ongoing food debate now a beloved ritual. But when Julian opened the front door, it wasn't the delivery person standing there. It was his father, Richard Hayes, a man he hadn't spoken to in nearly 7 years. "Julian," the older man said, his voice gruff with age and disuse. At 72, Richard looked frailer than Julian remembered, his once commanding presence diminished but not entirely gone. "Your assistant gave me your address." Julian stiffened, his hand tightening on the door. "What are you doing here?" Richard shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting past Julian to the interior of the apartment. "I heard about your boy, my grandson." The words hung between them, weighted with the irony neither could ignore. Richard Hayes had abandoned Julian and his mother when Julian was 12, pursuing business opportunities that apparently couldn't accommodate a family. It had shaped Julian's entire approach to life, his drive for success, his emotional detachment, his belief that vulnerability was weakness. "Now you're interested in family?" Julian asked, his voice low to prevent Thomas from overhearing. Richard's weathered face creased with what might have been regret. "I'm not here to defend what I did. God knows I can't." He paused, drawing a steadying breath. "But when I read about your custody arrangement in that business journal—" "They published that?" Julian interrupted, annoyed at the invasion of privacy. "Tech Titan restructures life for fatherhood, or something like that," Richard confirmed. "It got me thinking about choices, mine, yours." Before Julian could respond, Thomas appeared at his side, curious about the delay with the pizza. "Who are you?" he asked, looking up at Richard with unguarded interest. Richard's eyes widened. At the sight of the boy, recognition visible in his stunned expression. "I'm an old friend of your father's," he replied cautiously, looking to Julian for guidance. Julian hesitated, years of hurt warring with the transformation the past months had wrought in him. Finally, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Thomas, this is your grandfather. My father." Thomas's eyes grew round. "I have a grandpa?" He'd known Vanessa's parents, who lived in Philadelphia, but Julian's family had been a deliberate blank space. "Apparently," Julian said, the word carrying layers of meaning that passed over Thomas but registered clearly with Richard. "He's visiting us today." The evening that followed was surreal. 3 generations of Hayes men around a dining table, eating pizza, delivery arrived shortly after Richard, and navigating a conversation filled with careful omissions and new beginnings. Richard, to Julian's surprise, engaged genuinely with Thomas, listening to his dinosaur theories and responding with appropriate wonder. Later, after Thomas had gone to bed, tucked in by Julian with a story and a call to Vanessa as promised, the 2 men sat in the living room, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You're doing it differently," Richard observed, nursing the whiskey Julian had reluctantly offered. "Being a father." Julian nodded, unapologetic. That was the point. A heavy silence fell between them, decades of absence impossible to bridge in a single evening. "I don't expect forgiveness," Richard finally said. "I don't deserve it, but I'm proud of you, Julian. Not for the company or the money, for breaking the cycle." Julian studied his father, seeing for the first time the man beneath the abandonment. Old, now alone, perhaps finally understanding what he had sacrificed for success that ultimately meant nothing without someone to share it with. "Thomas has school events on Tuesdays and Thursdays," Julian said after a long moment, neither accepting nor rejecting the olive branch, but offering a small path forward. "If you're planning to be in Chicago." Richard nodded, understanding the tentative invitation for what it was. "I've been thinking about moving back, permanently." As his father left that evening, promising to call before his next visit, Julian stood at the window watching the older man's car disappear into the city traffic. The empire he had built, the control he had craved, the success he had chased, all of it had been a reaction to abandonment, a desperate attempt to prove his worth through achievement. Now, with Thomas asleep down the hall, Julian realized he was finally free from that burden. Success wasn't measured in acquisitions or market share, but in moments, helping with preschool homework, weekend museum adventures, dinosaur battles, and yes, even pineapple pizza debates. Julian Hayes had spent his life building walls to protect himself from the pain of abandonment. Now, piece by piece, a 4-year-old boy was teaching him how to tear them down. The next morning, Julian woke to find Thomas standing beside his bed, clutching his favorite robot toy. "Dad," he whispered, "can we have pancakes?" "Absolutely," Julian replied without hesitation. No meetings or calls or deals more important than this moment. As they mixed batter and created misshapen pancakes in the kitchen, Julian's phone remained untouched on the counter. The notifications from Horizon, emails from clients, and messages from his executive team could all wait. He had more important things to build now.